Hello, I'm Rajat, and for this final project, I wanted to delve into the specifics of a certain event that I and the rest of my home state went through. I'm from India, specifically from the state of Kerala. It's a great state. I'm sure some of you here at least have heard of the statistics of how our education and literacy rates are super high, and how we've dealt with widespread poverty really, really well. Aside from that, though, it's a very green state. Everywhere you look, it's filled with forests, filled with life. A beautiful place by nature. But during the monsoon season of 2018, Kerala faced a monumental issue, a flood, one that caused damage to the state and its people at a rate that we haven't seen in about 150 years. The flood is fairly famous. There's actually a movie on it and everything. The flood was mainly caused by the massive amount of rain that was precipitated on the region at that time. But as I discussed later, that's not the only reason for its destruction. Now, I don't really know how many of you have been in a flood or how you guys imagine what a flood looks like. And now most of you imagine a flood isn't probably what it looks like. So I'll try my best to describe how a flood feels like before we get to the specifics. A flood is usually shown in movies and other media as this huge volume of water rushing through a city or a town, crashing into houses, tearing them down like some sort of violent natural disaster, like a tornado or an earthquake or a tsunami. But that's not how it actually is. Not this one, at least. A flood isn't violent, but it is dangerous. It's strong but patient. The flood, it felt like it snuffs out your senses. The violent rain casts itself like a cloth over your eyes. You just can't see anything but the water. It's just cold and sharp. It hits the ground, and not in a sound of pitter patter, but instead sounding more like nails hitting a hardwood floor. Just a high pitched, sharp rattle is basically all you can hear. The water masks the smell and tastes of anything in the air and makes anything that it comes in contact with the same texture as itself. Everything is just wet and slippery. It's like trying to walk across an ice floor. It's like blindness induced by the very thing you need to live. Like being submerged by water while still standing on land. The flood doesn't appear in one fell swoop. No, it slowly encroaches. It crawls with this ultimate confidence. Like it knows that you can't stop it. My house in Kerala is very close to a main river called the Chalakudipura, which meant I watched the water climb slowly towards my house before it did anywhere else. In through the gates and eventually inside my house. My family at this point took our things and left to a relative's place where we decided to book a flight as fast as possible, as early as possible, to get out of Kerala and go to the Middle East where we live. The day we landed in the Middle East was the day that Kerala shut down all of its airports. My relatives all turned out safe. A friend of my dad took them all to his house, which was located at a much higher elevation. Our house there flooded halfway up the first floor, about 12 to 15 feet off the ground. In total, though, across the state, about 483 people died and 1.2 million people displaced from their homes. Coming back to the topic, though, what really caused a flood this bad? Even if it was just the rain that caused all of this, how could close to 500 people be killed just because of that? Well, reading this research article called Power, Paralysis, and Action Understanding Flood Risk Management in Kerala, India, by Medha Mukherjee, we find out that a good portion of these deaths came from the nearly 70 landslides that occurred as a result of the flood. The primary reason for these landslides, specifically the ones that are coming from the Western Ghats, that is a mountain range from the western side of India, turns out is because Kerala partakes in mining operations into the Western Ghats, overseen by the government. And the citizens and the other organizations who realized the danger that this had alerted the governments prior to all of this flooding. But mainly speaking, the response that they got was along the lines of, don't worry about it. Reading further into the article, it finds that the unwillingness to moderate the mining operations shown by the government is because of the fact that out of the 6,000 operations that took place, 2,000 of which were illegal and caused by the lobbyists to increase revenue. In fact, after the 2018 floods, Kerala faced floods of smaller magnitudes in the coming years. And even in those scenarios, after the 2018 flood, after we've seen all of the death and devastation that happened, there were still deaths happening in these flood events. Also because of landslide. Maybe the flood just happens to be so vicious that nothing the government could have done would have had a sizable impact on the mitigation of the flood. Except this research article named the role of dams on the flood of August 2018 in the Periyar River Basin, Kerala, by KP Sudhir and his team, shows how useful the dams were in mitigating the damage the flood could have caused. They decided to check the functionality of these dams by simulating the amount of rainwater in the amount of time that the majority of the flood took place in, and compare the actual water discharge to the scenarios where the dam was holding less water to see how much difference it would have made. Now, these simulations are of multiple kinds. One simulating the actual event where the dam was at 85 to 90% holding capacity, one at 75%, one at 50%, and then 25%. What was seen is that there would have been a significant reduction in water overflow if the government had issued strategic opening of the dams prior to this event. As we can see, it is 21% of a reduction. And this article does state that even if this result could have been achieved, there could not have been enough time to act as such, because in the moment, the probability of an event like this happening was so low, specifically they say 0.6%. But I disagree with this sentiment, considering the article also found that the rainfall in the months leading up to August were also higher than normal, as well as the fact that the flood event lasted around 20 days. In the first 8 days, the dam's stored water content was reduced to 85% from 90%. There has to be a reason why the government was delayed in their actions regarding dam water control, and there is. It's because these dams were never meant for environmental protection in the first place. These dams function is as a hydroelectricity generator, a power plant basically, and secondarily as irrigators, meaning it is economically incentivized to keep these dams near the 85% and higher range. The problem being, the flood's biggest hit wasn't going to be the economy, but the people. We see from the previous article that they found that the most impactful governing bodies were the ones at the smallest scales, the village and district councils, whereas the state government and the national government seem to face struggles in deciding what operations to employ to get the best result, thereby leading to very little, if anything, getting employed. This is where the people come in. You think that in an event, the biggest and fastest contributors would be the governing bodies, but no. The group to respond the fastest and thereby being the most impactful were the fishermen Now, these fishermen who are actively struggling to continue making a living due to the advent of fish farms, importation, and most of all, climate change, saw the flood and decided that they've got the means to do something about it. You cannot beat a flood, but these people who have tied their lives to the water know that you can outmaneuver it. A total of 4,537 fishermen put their lives on the line on 669 boats and helped save at least 65,000 lives. Their ability to navigate the waters with ease, as well as having boats bigger than the National Disaster Response Force, enough to house multiple people, meant that they could administer first aid on the boat and then get them to safe shelters after. Along with these fishermen, there were many instances of truck and public and private bus drivers taking to the roads to use their large vehicles to plow through the water and get people to safety, as well as groups such as the Off-Road Club of the district Idiki using their illegally modified vehicles to get to people where other cars couldn't. This, along with many other forms of aid, such as providing communal shelter, health and safety aid, and food, caused Kerala's community themselves to be their own saviors. The overall conclusion I draw here is that, yes, the interwovenness of Kerala has had a track record of being the state's strongest quality, and that showed itself in full during this 2018 flood. This is in contrast with the larger scale state and national governments that, although tried to help, were delayed and paralyzed by the conflict of revenue, politics, and even showcased a direct link to the community's detriment in the form of corruption due to lobbyists and their illegal mining. A tight knit community may not be the only thing that's needed to uplift a society, but at times of need, the fastest to respond to your calls of help are those closest to you. And this tragedy showcases how, even in dire circumstances, the common people looking out for each other is enough to keep the community afloat. Thank you.